Hi, it's Alistair at Electric Scotland. Just doing my usual introduction to my weekly newsletter for 19th of July 2019. I'll start off with the news items as usual. First article is the US land forever leased to England. It says every May the US Coast Guard and the Royal Navy hold a ceremony on a sliver of North Carolina land where 4 English World War II soldiers are buried. Didn't know about that. Really interesting wee article that, so I hope you'll have a wee read at that one. The next story is Scottish wind power output at record high. Again, quite an interesting wee story that. It actually says wind power output in Scotland hit a record high during the first 6 months of 2019, according to figures from Weather Energy. It is calculated the energy produced by turbines could power every home in Scotland and part of the north of England. So again, well worth reading that one, and I will add that it appears that we're now starting to get wave turbines working and actually producing electricity for us. And I think if that happens, there's all kinds of implications from this, and I must confess I feel the Scottish Government, as usual, lacks vision. I mean, we've all heard of Dyson deciding to move his head office to Singapore and produce his new electric car there. But you think, they might have said, well, look, come to Scotland, we've got wealth of cheap energy here, so why don't you build it in Scotland? In fact, I really think Scotland should seriously be looking at producing an electric car and trying to attract companies to come and build them. But that's the trouble with the Scottish Government. They lack brains, they lack vision, they lack enterprise. And that's why I say that I think an independent Scotland could be highly successful, but not with the SNP government in power. SNP are a waste of time. They're thick as 2 short planks, most of them, can't add up. And as you'll see, there's some other news around which shows that Scotland really is not thinking right. We need thinkers, we need visionaries, and we haven't got them. And the SNP are not encouraging them. If it's against their skewed view of the world, they're just not interested. But at the end of the day, to be successful, we have to be visionaries. We have to do new enterprises. I really don't understand it. I'll tell you this much. Under the SNP, Scotland will never be a successful country, ever. End of story. We need to get people out there doing things. Okay, next story is Brexit Britain has a big role to play in promoting free trade and reform of international aid. Markets such as Asia are developing fast. Africa, while currently offering little excitement as a destination for Western global traders, will grow at a rate that we risk overlooking, passing up an opportunity to secure ourselves opportunities. And don't forget, some of the biggest economies in Africa are in the Commonwealth. I can't help but believe that out of the EU on a no deal would be brilliant. And I'm perfectly certain that even if we come out with a no deal, we will eventually have some kind of deal going with the EU. I mean, it makes no sense to think otherwise. Okay, and another wee interesting article I found was, to survive in a wetter world, raise ducks, not chickens. It says farmers in Bangladesh are adapting to climate change, and it's having an impact in faraway places, including on restaurant menus. Actually, when you think about it, it makes sense, because, if a flood comes, chickens die, ducks don't, because ducks float on water. Okay, oh yeah, this is getting a lot of press all over the place. Scotland has the highest drug death rate in the EU. The figure is 27% higher than the previous year and the highest since records began in 1996. And following that, I've got another article that says, is minimum alcohol pricing killing drug addicts? It says, we have dramatically changed the price of low-cost alcohol in Scotland. It is now higher than the UK's, shown on the table. And just 2 years later, we are seeing an escalating rise in drug-related deaths. I'm glad someone pointed this out because, we should be looking at it. There may not be a relationship, but the thing is, I think there's things to suggest there is a relationship. And we need to prove it one way or another and be prepared to make changes. Okay, and another really interesting article I found this week was the resurrection of Scottish foreign policy. Its revival comes after more than 300 years of dormancy. Basically, this is a truly excellent article, and I got permission to post a PDF of it on the site. But the trouble is, the PDF, there's 3 graphs that actually go off the edge of the page, and you can't scroll to see the full graph. So while I put it up on the site, I have put a link to the actual article where you can in fact see the full graphics. But it's a kind of summary position on our trading relationship over 300 years. And it's actually, if you read a lot of the history on Elected Scotland, you'll know all about this. But most people don't want to read the detail. And I felt this was a beautiful summary of Scotland's position, like the old alliance and things like that are discussed. And also the Darien scheme is also discussed in it. So it's a potted history, but a very good one. So I hope you might read that. The next one is, because of Brexit, the new despite Brexit. It says unemployment is at record lows, wages are rising at the fastest rate in a decade, the gender gap is evaporating, creating a more equal society. Which country is that? So click the link to learn more. Then another story which caught my eye was MOD and £10 million pound bid to develop the world's first hypersonic jets. It says the Ministry of Defence is to take out a £10 million contract to develop hypersonic propulsion systems that could potentially see the UK's current fighters travel at twice their top speeds. It's a fascinating wee article, that. Then the next one is way cleared for Bercow to face formal bullying inquiry. It says MPs last night paved the way for John Bercow to finally face an official probe over serious bullying allegations made against him by former staff. This is the Speaker of the House of Commons. Right, Scottish income tax 941 million short of forecast. So under a new risk-sharing mechanism, the Scottish Government will get an extra 737 million to make up for the shortfall. But you see, this is where I think that we're thick as 2 short planks in Scotland. We can't add up, so we can't do accounts. So anytime we do a seriously big IT project, it always goes way wrong. I mean, some of these people need to be sacked or removed from office. They really do. I mean, it's just despicable what's going on in Scotland. We're just allowing the non-entities to take charge of things. And because they're non-entities, they haven't a clue what they're talking about. Okay, next story is stunning decorated Neolithic stone discovered in Orkney. The decorated stone was found on Monday, followed by further discoveries of smaller carved stones during the rest of the week. I always think the stuff they're finding at Orkney is just mind-blowing. I mean, bearing in mind the big settlements they found in Orkney predate Stonehenge by 1,000 years. You know, so I mean, it'd be lovely to time travel back to Orkney back in those days and look at Britain from that point of view. Okay, and final story is the moon now a proving ground for Mars. Said United States is embarking on another mission to the moon. But unlike the Apollo program that put humans on its surface 50 years ago, NASA is gearing up for a long-term presence that the agency says will eventually enable humans to reach Mars. Really, I mean, if you like space trade, because we're celebrating 50 years of the moon landing, of course, at the moment, and there's been a lot of stuff on the television about that. But I think it makes a lot of sense, you know, and again, if you're interested in space, you should read that. Okay, so that was the news stories I found for you this week. Now on to Electric Canadian. I've got another volume of the Canadian Horticulture Stock, which is volume 35 from 1912. Oh yeah, and I'm making a comment about these Canadian magazines. I found a whole ton of different magazines that Canada used to put out. I mean, some of them are still going, but most of them are now dead and gone. But anytime I find a Canadian magazine, I'm adding it to our magazines section on Electric Canadian. And what I'm doing there is, when I put the name of the magazine, I'm always trying to give you one volume you can read from the site, because I download it, make it available on the site for you to download and read. But I'm then putting a link to the Internet Archive, and what I do is I do a search for that magazine on the Internet Archive, and sometimes I find, maybe 9 extra copies. So I take the search term that discovered the 9 copies and make that a link to the Internet Archive. So when you click on that link, you'll see the copies there. And in this particular case, I've got a couple more, which is the Canadian Chemical Journal. So there's a few more issues of that available. Canadian Field Naturalist, I think if I remember right, there's about another 126 issues that you can read on the Internet Archive. And the Canadian Entomologist, I think there's 143 other copies that you can read on the Internet Archive. So I mean, I've given you a link to whenever I put a new magazine up, I try and find volume 1. Because if I can find volume 1, I like to take that, because it gives you the rationale of why the magazine came out and gives you an indication of what they're planning to do with it in the years ahead. So I always think volume 1's particularly of interest, and if I can get hold of them, I put them up. Oh yeah, and discovered the Wentworth Historical Society. I discovered another volume, volume 6, so I've put that up. And then the final one for Electric Canadian is The Heroines of Canadian History. It's by W.S. Harrington, produced in 1910. So again, if you want to read about Canadian women, there you go. Okay, so on to Electric Scotland. We've got Best Newfangled Family Tree. And she's saying, as I write, Hurricane Barry is going ashore at New Orleans. I grew up when hurricanes came through Jacksonville, Florida quite often, and I'm terrified of them. After the storms, we used to drive to the beach and see where the houses used to be. I pray that all will be safe where this hurricane goes. And she sent me in section B of the August 2019 issue. She's commenting about how there's many interesting articles. She said I was particularly moved by the article about Mary Queen of Scots, which has a photograph of her death mask. She looked absolutely nothing like her portraits, and was so very young appearing and beautiful. History was not always kind, was it? The other story that I found very emotional was the sightseeing story of Bill Millen, the D-Day Piper. I think he'd be moved as well. I might add that she's put a link to where you can watch the wee video, but it didn't work. But you can kind of manipulate the URL a little bit, and you'll find that it is available. And she goes on to talk about a few other bits and pieces. So anyway, there you go. The next story is Rough Recollections of Military Service and Society. It's by Lieutenant Colonel Barkaris D. Wardlaw Ramsey, and it's in 2 volumes, produced in 1882. I put the preface, he says, I go back 40 years for its subject. In the summer of 1841, when quartered at Brighton, I was asked by a celebrated portrait painter, an old Royal Academician, to sit for my likeness. The result was not pleasing to my family, and the picture was not bought. In the following summer, 1842, it was exhibited in the Royal Academy by the R.A., who, being one of the oldest fellows, if not the oldest, had a right to the place of honour for his pictures. The consequence was that the portrait of my unfortunate self was the first work of art that fell upon the gaze of the bewildered public as they ascended the steps of the old building in Trafalgar Square. And happily, for my peace of mind, the illustrious Punch, which commenced its literary career at the same time that I commenced my military one, reviewed the productions of the Academy this year. Not having a copy of the 2nd volume of Punch by me to refer to, I am unable to quote the exact words used, but there was something of the following effect. Who is this in the place of honour? We turn to the catalogue and find that it is the portrait of Colonel Barkaris Dalrymple Wardlaw Ramsey, Royal Scots Greys, and we ask, what has this young comet with 4 unpronounceable names done? What has the public done that his likeness should be placed there? Merely, we suppose, that they may behold or exclaim, there are plenty of this class to be seen walking up and down Regent Street between the hours of 4 and 7 p.m. It is after the lapse of 40 years it may again be asked by my illustrious monitor Punch, what has this colonel done? What has the public done that these memoirs should be thrust upon it? To the first part of the question I could only say, alas, nothing, save to have lived 40 years longer than the comet, to have seen many persons and diverse countries, to have kept his eyes and ears open, and above all, to have diligently studied Punch's Weekly during these 40 years. To the second part of the question, well, perhaps the public is not so well behaved now as it was in 1842, and a slight punishment in the way of another biography may not be amiss. At all events, relying upon the incontrovertible fact that biographies and cookery books always command a ready sale, I inflict this slight chastisement on the public, who will be pleased to remember it is given in a loving and fatherly spirit. And as to the illustrious Punch, I consider the fact of my having studied him weekly ever since will atone for the involuntary indiscretion stigmatized by him 40 years ago, and lead to a modicum of praise being bestowed by him on my present intrusion upon the public. That was written from Rome in May 1882. But it's fascinating who he met and knew. I mean, he obviously worked in very high royal circles and travels well around the world, many countries. So, I mean, I think you're going to enjoy that if you take the trouble to read it. Okay, now I've got The Scotchman in America, addresses, songs, etc. at Scottish gatherings, religious poems and occasional verses by John Proudfoot, produced in 1873. This is where his little poetry, bits of poetry done at all these events, apparently they all thought they were great and they wanted him to produce a book on them, which he did, and this is the one. And then I found another book, The Scot in America and the Ulster Scot. It's being the substance of addresses before the Edinburgh Philosophical Institution, 1st November 1911, and the Presbyterian Historical Society, Belfast, on the 28th of March 1912, by Whitelaw Reid. So I thought you might find that of interest. And then following that up, I got one, The God's Frontiersman, the Scots-Irish epic, This is a full-pack mini-series which is no longer available, but it's been scanned in from an old VHS tape, so it's a little on the blurry side. But I put a link to it from our Ulster page. So I've got the 4 parts there, so you can click each one and watch it. It's been, well, I don't know. I certainly watched the first one and I thought it was great. Okay, and another one, Scotland Before 1700. This is from Contemporary Documents, edited by P. Hume Brown in 1893. It's a mine of curious sociological and general information about the country and its inhabitants. A really excellent read. And certainly I very much encourage you to have a read of that, because there's some great information in it. I mean, certainly the period before 1700 is a period we don't know that well. And he's found a whole pile of great information about early Scotland, and so it's well worth a read there. I then got The Life of Ralph Erskine. This is, I added a book about him to our Erskine page, along with a link to his 7 volumes of work. I mean, he's quite a character, really is. There's a book about him, and also, as I say, a link to the 7 volumes of his sermons and all kinds of stuff that he produced over the years. Then Clan Stirling. Added some new information to our Stirling of Fairburn to the foot of the page. I also had a graphic showing the interrelationships of the various Stirling cadet branches and how they're related to the Stirlings of Cadder. So, again, if you're part of Clan Stirling, you'll be interested in that. Then The Gold Thread and Wee Davy. This is children's stories by the late Reverend Norman MacLeod, which you can read at the link I provide. And then finally, The Brexiteer. This is issue 1 of this new newspaper from the Brexit Party. And it's issue 1. I thought I should keep a copy on the site, and I've done that. Then the story this particular week is, in the average Canadian household, 1 in 4 produce items get thrown in the garbage. That's like throwing away $600 a year. By sharpening your food storage skills, you'll save both food and money. And that came out of an article which I saw in CapEx, which is 1.3 billion tons. Annual amount of food lost or thrown away globally, about 30% of total production. This is a figure that was featured in the CapEx news and just goes to show how this is a terrible waste of food. We all must do much better. I mean, that's terrible. When people are starving, 30% of our total production of food is going in the garbage. Terrible. And it's got implications for landfill. You put produce in landfill, gives off gases which we don't want. So, there you go. So that's basically what I picked for the story for this week. Is I thought maybe partly educational, really, because it's telling you what fresh products should be stored in the freezer, in drawer 1 or drawer 2, or instead a bowl on the counter, or just keep it in the cupboard. So like here in the cupboard, garlic, potatoes, winter squash and onions can all be just kept in the cupboard. And a bowl on the counter recommends avocados, peaches, plums, bananas, unripe ones that is, pears, tomatoes and nectarines. So if you keep your tomatoes in the fridge, get them out and stick them on the counter. I must confess I tend to keep my tomatoes in the fridge, so I have to rethink that. Okay, so anyway, that's what I've got for you this week. Some really good stuff there. I hope you follow some of it up and enjoy a read. And obviously we'll hear next week about whether Boris Johnson has become our new Prime Minister or not, as the case may be. I think we hear on Tuesday next week. So looking forward to that. I mean, frankly, he's a very enthusiastic person, I'm hoping he might turn around a number of these Remainers that don't want to leave under a no deal. And he's promised a few things that I haven't really bothered highlighting it because I think most people are pretty settled in their ways as to whether they want Brexit or don't want Brexit. Personally speaking, I want Brexit. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity for us to re-engage with the Commonwealth and to do a great deal with the USA. And to me, that's the whole point of Brexit, is that we can be independent, we can do our own thing for the benefit of our country. And I just don't understand the Remainers. Why do they want to be dictated to? Do they not have faith that they can make their own decisions anymore? I mean, these Remainers are cowards, essentially. Look at all the Project Fear, which has come to nothing. I mean, we've been more successful since we voted to leave than we've ever been in many, many, many years. And yet people still cling to the Project Fear stories that come out. Philip Hammond, I mean, every time we got the SES assassination squad out and starting putting bullets in people's heads. At least I feel that way, you know. I mean, I don't suppose you should do it, but at the end of the day, I just feel that, like the Brexit bashing corporation, the BBC, are traitors to this country. They've clearly got no faith in the British people, no faith in British business, and I think it's disgusting. I don't think people should be allowed to be in politics if they have no faith in the country at all. I think it's terrible. And all the anti-Semitism coming out of the Labour Party is just absolutely disgusting. I mean, who on earth would want to vote for Labour unless you're a horrible person that hates Jews and stuff like that? You know what I mean? It's appalling. And that's what Boris Johnson's, what was that he quoted about the burqa being like a letterbox? I mean, it is. I mean, anyone with any common sense would realise that if you only got a little bit to look out your eyes, you do look like a letterbox, for Pete's sake. You know, that's a fact. It's not being derogatory. It just seems to be stupid. And I know in Canada we have the same kind of discussions going on. But apparently things have changed since I got Canadian citizenship, because one of the things this judge stated is that when we all took the oath, the staff would be wandering around to make sure we were all saying those words. And clearly if your mouth is covered, you can't see if the person's actually saying the words. That's why they don't want to allow it, but apparently there's some way that they've now turned that around. But frankly, I think it's ridiculous myself. But anyway, that's life. So there you go. That's the newsletter for this week. I think there's some absolutely great stuff in this week, and if you don't read it, you're an idiot. Well, not really. I suppose you've got other things to do. Luckily, I can spend all my time researching stuff, and I'm having a great time doing it all. So I just hope you'll enjoy this one, and as always like to hear comments from you about whatever you think. And anyway, look forward to hearing from you. So take care, have a great weekend when it comes. Cheers.